Everyone has something to share, in either wisdom, story, or logic. And it's clearly amazing to hear all the different missing links discovered by people, unique to their own journeys, and in how they have come to discover them. Together, we can help to build a bigger picture for a better future, for a brighter tomorrow. Let's stand united. Let's remove the veils, and let's create a new world together. Are you that missing link? Join Jesse Hale on the Missing Link Talk Show as he helps to unveil the mystery through the unique wisdom and story of others.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome everybody here back to the Missing Link. Today we're excited to talk to a firstborn Canadian from a Finnish family. He's living where he grew up in the beautiful Okanagan Valley. He's got the history and propaganda, co-founder of bulletproofpub.com. He's background in 3 fine arts, fine, utilitarian, and liberal. How are you doing today, brother Duane?
I'm doing fantastic, Jesse. I really appreciate being here. I certainly love your show. I've watched it for a while now, and I've wanted to be on here actually for a few months now. So when you contacted me, I was ecstatic and very much looking forward to this conversation today, buddy.
Awesome, brother. Well, why don't you start off with telling us about yourself, telling us about your journey, a little bit about your background, education. We mentioned a little bit where you are, but what part of the world you grew up in, what part of the world you're in now, what got you into farming, what got you into knowing about the world, anything that you wanted to share with the audience today about yourself, especially if they're hearing you here for the first time.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a full-time farmer, market gardener, and this is our 6th year now. And I'm also a forensic historian during the fall, during the off season. And so the 3 arts that you've mentioned there earlier, the fine arts, the utilitarian arts, and the liberal arts, these are the main arts that there are. And so throughout my life, just kind of following my heart, I sort of accidentally discovered all of these on my own. My first love was journalism, to be honest. Before even art, I wanted to be a journalist. And this is going back to my teen years. I was a traveling musician and in a professional cover band for the first 2 or 3 years coming out of high school. And so I have a deep sort of background in graphic arts and arts through school because I was so kind of out of control at school that they kind of changed my curriculum for me. They gave me extra art classes, and basically I was just a troublemaker in school. Grade 11 and grade 12, I was basically not even there. Somehow I managed to pass, but the only way that they could get me to stay in school was to offer me more art classes and ways to express myself. So since then, I've been following my heart, and I stumbled into the Trivium in 2010. And this is grammar, logic, rhetoric. And then over this last decade or so of research and investigation into the real history, I discovered that this really is the answer that we're looking for. The trivium, the quadrivium. This is the first basic parts to a liberal arts degree. So this enables us to really see the world. It teaches you logical fallacy. So I was able to empower myself with some weapons and some ways to protect my person. So just understanding logical fallacy alone, like the ad hominem or, the appeal to authority we see a lot these days. And so these things really blew me away when I discovered them. And so ever since, it's been sort of a journey of self-development to see how influential and how great of a person I can possibly be. And that's really been the journey. And so I grew up here in the Okanagan Valley, Kelowna, Vernon area. I spent 20 years in Vancouver, and I just recently moved back. Well, now 11 years ago, I've been back home. And so my wife and I have gone on this venture, market gardening, because we felt like, a lot of the food that was on the supermarkets wasn't good enough. And certainly there was no taste to any of it. And so we started replacing some of that food on supermarket shelves. We provide to local restaurants here in our hometown Kelowna. And we offer also a very popular harvest box, weekly harvest box here. And we are aiming at 100 families to serve this year. So this really is an amazing aspect to my life. I've kind of been able to successfully balance my research with getting out into the real world and doing something tangible. Not necessarily to fight back against something, but to present an option, another option. I'm not necessarily sold on this fact that we hear a lot of people tell us we need to fight against this new world order. I think we just need to present a beautiful argument, and it'll be a no-brainer when we start growing food from the soil and telling each other the truth. We all of a sudden have a real great place to build upon. And so this has been the journey to feed people and get something into their stomach so that they can start to think a little clearer, and then start to present with what we find through primary source material, the real true history sort of hidden underneath even the levels that independent and alternative media outlets have gone. So maybe that's where we should probably share the first screen. And so what I'm talking about really a lot these days is progressivism. On all the interviews that I've been going on lately, this has been an essential part to the New World Order that's very underappreciated by most people that I see. There's not many people talking about this progressive aspect to the New World Order. And really, it is the conduit within which they've presented this reordering, this radical reformation of Western society. It comes through the progressive movement. And so we're all aware of how the definition of liberalism has changed over the 20th century. Essentially, at the beginning here, we're talking about classical liberalism. We're going back to the US Constitution and the freedom of the individual to speak his mind and to congregate where he wishes and to do what he wants. This is really the definition of classic liberalism, but we've seen it turn over the last 100 years into neoliberalism, sort of a belief in larger government and the building of a nanny state in protecting the ordinary civilian from the damage of corporations and such. And so what we really see is the amalgamation of private and public entities. So what is that but fascism? The very definition of Mussolini's fascism is corporatism. So we're seeing now 100 years of hindsight, some of these decisions that were made first at this place called the House of Truth. And so this place is really looked upon even by mainstream as the saviors of today's liberalism. And these are the gentlemen here that really helped change the definition. So here we are 100 years later wondering how that happened. Well, we're going to get into the exact people, places, and events that helped shape that. And so in that first picture here, we've got 3 Supreme Court justices in Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., Louis Brandeis, and Felix Frankfurter. Okay, and then what many media studies professors at universities consider the founding father of American journalism, Walter Lippmann. Okay, now when we consider Walter Lippmann's longest running syndicated column, Today and Tomorrow, he was very influential through the first 60 years of the 20th century. Many people look to Walter Lippmann's opinions as to what they should do and what they should back in America, especially. And so his syndicated column is called Today and Tomorrow. So right away, we notice the absence of yesterday. Okay, and this is kind of the real approach of progressivism, this always in motion, moving forward, no time to ask questions or of ethical or moral values, and whether what we are choosing to do in the advancement of technology is good for the future of humanity. And so what we're seeing now with 100 years of hindsight, many people can agree, no matter what side of the political paradigm you find yourself on, that we're kind of in a dangerous place. So this House of Truth, 1 mile from the White House, 1727 19th Street. And so these people would congregate. And so we have Walter Lippmann Felix Frankfurter, living at this place. They're all Harvard grads. Then they're not only just Harvard law grads, but they are magna cum laude, summa cum laude. They are the top of the class coming out of Harvard, and they all end up living at this house owned by Robert Grosvenor Valentine. And now, so he comes directly from the Taft administration. So we're talking 1911, 1912 is when this House of Truth started. I've included this map of the DuPont Circle with a red dot as to exactly where that is. Some people may be familiar with the DuPont Circle area of Washington and just how influential it itself has been in our history. But the House of Truth is located just north of there. And so we see this amazing congregation of not just the founding father of American journalism, but 3 Supreme Court justices that admitted to radical reformation and experimentation on the U.S. Constitution. So this is very profound when we start to see that, our personal individual rights to speak are being, censored. This is really where it all began. So it doesn't take long before you start to see, for those that are in the know, William Howard Taft's father, Alfonso, is the one that founded Skull and Bones. And so we see really out of the Henry Stimson, Elihu Root, and William Howard Taft trifecta, these guys are all Phi Beta Kappa, all Skull and Bones. And out of that administration comes the idea for this house. And there's the owner, Robert Grosvenor Valentine. He's the father of industrial relations. Okay. And so we see a really incredible collective of talent, if we want to use that word here. So what we're talking about when we talk about industrial relations is really this book, The Principles of Scientific Management.
Kimberly is asking, what's a forensic historian?
Oh, a forensic historian is someone who would go deep into the source material, primary source material, most effectively, and determining from the literature of those involved and documents and artifacts that have survived the last 100 years from those that are involved. And so for a perfect example of what a forensic historian is going to do is get into this Principles of Scientific Management book. It was first published in 1911, and it was only distributed to owners of factories and corporations, and then released to the public in 1913. Now a first edition of this Principles of Scientific Management, I looked it up last night, and it's over $500, and I want one because it is about as important an artifact that there is in order to tell the true history of America. Okay, so hidden within the velvet sort of frontispiece, the cover here is a fasces. Okay, so we see the paralleling of American culture into a fascist state, along with sort of their friendship and this affiliation that they have with Mussolini just, about 10 years after this. But the amazing thing about this Principles of Scientific Management is that it has been translated into every language on the planet and used by all totalitarian leaders, including Stalin, Lenin, Trotsky, Mao. And they've used this to impose the human being into the factory. Okay, so this is really the initial rudimentary steps of the singularity movement, the combining of the human with the machine. And so we're pulling sources out of like this one here for anybody that's asking about what a forensic historian is. This is it here. We look into these magazines. We pull out the Scientific American magazines, and we go into these articles where they discuss and reveal all kinds of things. Your intro talks about, lifting the veil. Well, this is really what we're doing. We're literally finding the missing links in all of the investigations that have been going on up until this point, because I have not heard anybody talk about any of this. We will often hear people talk about the Skull and Bones. They'll talk about Freemasonry and the New World Order, but rarely do people get into the real details of it and the grammar, the who, what, why, where, when of it. So this is Frederick Winslow Taylor. He died shortly after publishing this book, 1915, I think. So 2 years after it was made public, he was dead. Now, how that happened, we aren't sure, but it's kind of coincidental.
As we know, it's probably fishy in behavior because,
Yes.
things seem to be fishy around these parasites.
Yep. And I would say, even, when we talk about this guy here, Robert Grosvenor Valentine, he died in the presence of Felix Frankfurter and several others at Domenico's restaurant in New York right after having something to eat. So that's as far as my research has gone. But, Frankfurter definitely took over for caring for the family, and through that process says a lot of things that we've heard maybe through the Seth Rich stories and all of these, where the family's really protected and isolated from public opinion, and they're asked to leave the family alone during these times of respect. And all of us, of course, can understand that. But what it allowed Felix Frankfurter to do was really take control of the narrative coming out of there. And so that's as far as I've researched there. But it is an incredibly intriguing line of research that I'd love to go down.
When you mentioned, the skull and bones, we typically
Mm-hmm.
think that's from Yale, but you
Mm-hmm.
said all these guys came from Harvard. So would the skull
Mm-hmm.
and bones have their, little underwear parties in like all these different major universities where they're drinking out of skulls, and maybe like Princeton would have a skull and bones and all these major universities? Or is it specifically just Yale, or is there Yale Harvard connection, or how does that work into your
Right.
research?
Well, that's a great question. So it's really about the university system. And in some of our other work, we've exposed that there is an entire network that's connecting all of these universities together. And so whether you're in Yale, Harvard, or Columbia, you're also part of the Ivy League. And so, when we read Charles Homer's Haskins' Rise of the Universities, and this is somebody we can get into perhaps a little later, but he's a member of the Inquiry and a very influential person in the creation of the CFR. But he wrote a book back in these days as well, talking about the rise of the university system and where that all came from. And so you can talk about Skull and Bones or Scroll and Key or any of the numerous number of secret societies. They're all affiliated in their structure. This is a way that they can gather and covet the intelligent creatives. So those people that are doing well in school and have an Anglophile sort of Atlanticist Western viewpoint, they're going to start to influence and start to put into positions in our culture to influence us. Walter Lippmann called those people entering wedges, a sort of expertness between the normal civilian and the vast universe in which he is entangled. These are the words that they use. Okay, so this is the progressive angle, saying that we see this even today, that a reliance on the technical expert, right? A lot of through COVID, through government restrictions, a lot of that was done through the opinions of experts, not necessarily those we elected. So we see this 100 years later. And so what I really wanted to do was find the source of all of this stuff that was going on. And so really it all kind of comes to this one place, the House of Truth.
So just like the Roman Catholic has their tentacles basically in every single facet of life, this would be the House of Truth, their tentacles through all these secret societies or Ivy League things. They'd have their tentacles in all these areas to try to find the best and the brightest to bring them into their circle, because they can't have anybody that's going to be a superstar outside of their sphere of influence.
That's exactly it. Yep. And they use a university system just like they do the common school education system that we've all been through, 15,000 hours of compulsory education, leaving us with nothing at the age of 19 or 20. But we all have been witness to how that works. Those that get great grades and are able to regurgitate or memorize all of this information, they're the ones that are going to be fast tracked to higher education, where a lot of this stuff that I'm revealing today is actually used in dissertations. So a lot of this sort of secretive knowledge uh, isn't so secret in the highest echelons of universities. So a lot of this is revealed to those chasing liberal arts degrees, because those are really the ones that are going to be used in society as influencers. And so a lot of our research, actually, a lot of the primary source material comes from dissertations from Harvard, from Yale, from their archives. So this is what I would call primary source material in many ways. And so let's talk about the origins of the progressive movement. The first inklings of it are from this man here, Herbert Crowley. So nobody has probably heard of this awkward-looking gentleman here, but he's the co-founder of the New Republic, and I'm sure there's a lot of your viewers and listeners that are familiar with that. It is a progressive bullhorn still to this day. When we talk about Biden or Hillary Clinton or Obama, they are all progressives. It's all written into their logos and into their speech, hope and change. And so one of those words that they use is preparedness, and another one that they use is efficiency. And so we're seeing that a lot these days. So
Have you heard of communitarianism?
I've heard of it, yeah.
So that's kind of the new the new fascism word, I guess, because people don't want to, call things fascist, because everybody knows that fascist is probably a bad thing. So
Right.
it's now called communitarianism, where they're mixing communism and capitalism.
Right.
So the needs or the things of the many outweigh the rights of the single. So
Right.
back into the same thing, fascist, but they're calling it a new great word called
Mhm.
communitarianism. That, hey, I got to do my duty, go stick that poison in your arm for the greater
Yep.
good,
Mhm.
because you don't want to hurt grandma. And I think that's all under the communitarianism label. So maybe
Right.
look into the communitarianism, because there's a lot of people that are now speaking that lingo, trying
Right.
to get people to be people of aware, because you say fascist, oh yeah, they're not fascist. But if
Mhm.
you say communitarianists, well, what is that? And it gets more people now researching what this actually is, what they're
Right.
trying to adopt on us today.
Yeah, and I would say that that's what they did with the word communism for the last 100 years. It's really just been protecting this fascist infiltration of America that started in the First World War and the preparation of the First World War in 1917 with the executive order of putting Bernard Baruch at the head of the War Industries Board. This is really where they discovered that, the government can't, well, at least this is what they said, was that the government was far too inefficient to be able to create all of the tanks and artillery and ammunition necessary to overthrow governments in Europe. So, this is what they did. And so it all goes back to this book, The Promise of American Life by Herbert Crowley. He is a resident of the House of Truth. He also lived 2 blocks away, but he's constantly there. He's a close friend of Walter Lippmann. Together with all of these people in this house, they create the New Republic.
Any
And so,
relation to Aleister Crowley?
no, this is Crowly.
Okay.
Herbert Crowley. And so he writes this book, The Promise of American Life. Okay, no, it's very similar in name as the American Dream. And out of this same sort of milieu comes a lot of these phrases, including neoliberalism. And Walter Lippmann has a say in all of that too. So this small little group of people are so highly influential. And the more we dig on these people, the wider their influence becomes, until it's really international. And it grows from the House of Truth really opening in 1911, 1912, to them all being at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. And all of them were very influential personal advisors to Woodrow Wilson, to David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister there, to Borden, the Canadian p.m. that attended. So they're working in cahoots with this Rhodes Roundtable, which is really where the progressivism mantra comes from, is Britain and this Fabian socialist approach to dealing with the poor and needy in our society. So again, we're talking about things that sound nice and, you know, very few people could argue with, but it's how they've manipulated their authority over us and been able to use that to control society in ways that we weren't expecting or that they didn't even advertise at the time. So Theodore Roosevelt, he publicly has identified Crowley's book as being the impetus, as you can see here, for his 1912 progressive campaign platform, New Nationalism.
Can you just make it a little bit bigger?
Sure.
Right
Is
there.
that better?
And then turn it to the right a little bit. If you can move it over, it's just slightly to the...
Yeah.
No,
like that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is that better?
Perfect. Now I can read it. I know a lot of people might not be able to read on their phone if they're watching, but right now it works perfect on the computer. Okay. I can actually read it.
Right. So you can see that he wrote 1914, Progressive Democracy. And so this is really where it is all established. You can see that it's edited by Arthur M. Schlesinger. So he's a major name in American history. He's an influencer of the media through the 20th century. And so Herbert Crowley, The Promise of American Life, establishes the Bull Moose platform. So many people have heard of the Bull Moose Party and Theodore Roosevelt in the famous 1912 election, but few understand that that's the very first progressive campaign. And so although Roosevelt wasn't elected, Woodrow Wilson had very similar campaign promises. And so there was a shift there, 1912, that they all went over to influence Woodrow Wilson rather than Theodore Roosevelt. Now, the reasons to that I'm not entirely clear of. I would say that when you look at the two personalities between Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, they're very different. And probably Roosevelt a little harder to coach or control or to steer than Woodrow Wilson, who was basically just happy to be there. He's more of a intellectual, scholarly type. He's actually the only president that had a degree. And so there was a shift there, and they went in behind Woodrow Wilson, 1912. He gets elected, and
that's the Federal Reserve time.
Yes. So 1912, this is where I really want to get to on your program here today, is that in the first term of Woodrow Wilson, 1912 to 1916, we see a deliberate imposition of progressive ideas and radical social reform in America domestically. He gets reelected 1916 on the quote, "He kept us out of war." So he gets reelected because he actually kept America out of war up until that point. But less than 4 months after he was elected, he declares war on Germany. So and this is one of those questions that historians have long grappled with, this immediate sort of about face that Wilson had in his platform. And so I'm pointing at exactly why and the people that influenced him, because it's at this point that Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter, Louis Brandeis are three guys surrounding Wilson with a ton of influence. This is when Wilson elects Brandeis as per executive order in the middle of the night to the Supreme Court of America. And so this is his and Frankfurter's election to the Supreme Court of the United States. Very contentious, very controversial. There was many, many people upset with this, but together they spent 60 something years, almost end to end, back to back, influencing the U.S. Supreme Court. They admit to experimentation. They admit to being radical reformists. Okay, so this is very interesting to anybody that wants to know why there's an attack on the U.S. Constitution. Well, it started here with these guys that many people even today still trust, But Brandeis has a giant network. He has his own university, and a lot of these to continue this neoliberal progressive approach to society, this Fabian socialist slow nudging of society into the directions that they want. This is where it really happened. So you can see that.
Was there a lot of German influence around him? Some of these names sounded so. It's interesting how they attack Germany, but he's got a lot of German influence around him. So again, they want to create the war so they control both sides of the war. It's kind of seems like that's been their MO for a long time.
Yeah, and Lippmann, Frankfurter, Brandeis, Walter Weil, and many of these are Jewish. They're German Jews. So, you start tracing all of this back through their lineage, and it all goes back to Germany. And so a lot of what we value here in the West, including our education and our philosophy, some major aspects to the way that we think and the way that we act here are deeply influenced by, German culture.
German and Jewish.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of our psychology, whether you look at, Nietzsche or Freud, right? It's all coming from Germany. Freud is the uncle of Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda. And so, we're not really stressing their ethnic background or, sort of who they are at this point. We're just showing the true history and just trying to stay objective to the whole thing. It's important for me as I do this research to sort of do my best to remove all biases and all prejudiced filters and all stereotypical sort of beliefs that I had prior to. And we're just laying down the facts that we can prove. And so I was blown away once we started to find this there's an ominous continuity that has gone through the 20th century, and they use the same language as they did 100 years ago. And they use a lot of these men that we're talking about now as the founders of these movements. So you can see I've included some quotes as to the background. Virtually everyone he knew was wealthy Jewish and of German background. Now that comes from his biography. Ronald Steele, he is Walter Lippmann's official biographer. And even Ronald Steele admits that Walter Lippmann was a lifetime member of the CFR and one of its founders. Okay. So that's actually an incredible discovery, because Walter Lippmann if he is a founding father of modern American journalism, should not be rubbing shoulders with the elite, and being schooled by Julius Sachs of Goldman Sachs, and then claiming to be an outsider. So this is one of the things. Yes, this is one of the things with Lippmann that people, again, historians are confounded by. How can he claim to be an outsider when he was such an insider? And really, if you go to the history of propaganda, we've done some short documentary films on him, and we go a little bit deeper into his background. And so there I say that, many of us wonder if he was, he fell prey to, the wealth and prestige of the elites. Well, I claim that he was born right into it. His biographer says that he was born right into a Jewish ghetto, and all of his friends were wealthy and rich. And so we're just sort of establishing the background of these people and where they come from. So he's a member of the Century Club, the Metropolitan Club, and these are all where, decisions are made. I think it's probably good to say here that as far as the two-party system exists today, it's really just a giant fallacy. It's really not real. It's an illusion. And I think that, this is again where that started, the takeover of our ability to speak or to vote the proper people in.
Illusion of choice, two wings of the same bird. To get people to choose sides when it's all the same side, but people get that illusion of choice. They think that they're actually, fighting against the other side. And this is kind of the start of it. So this is all, I guess, pre-Bilderberg Group So
Yep.
this is the Bilderberg group of
Yep.
the early 19th century.
This is the same milieu that the Bilderberg comes out of, because these are the creators of the Council on Foreign Relations, and that's where Bilderberg comes from. So what I wanted to get across here is that decisions aren't being made by your vote. They're being made by rich people in private clubs, such as the Century Club or the Lotus Club or the Cosmos Club or the Council on Foreign Relations, or, all of these, even Skull and Bones and Phi Beta Kappa. This is really where American foreign policy and domestic policy is thought up, implemented, and executed. Okay, so I invite people to
Good work, brother.
I invite people to go to the History of Propaganda, bulletproofpub.com. We've got an amazing array of stories there and articles that go deep into all of the aspects in which the New World Order was imposed. We get into Aldous Huxley and his influence in Los Angeles, and the political salon. This is something else I'd like to actually get into, is that the House of Truth is essentially a political salon. So if anybody's unfamiliar with what that is, a political salon really born out of the French Revolution in the mid 18th century. And so it's a place where it's a house essentially, and it'll be, organized by the owner of that home, and talented people of the political scene or the art scene or literary scenes will collect there, and they start to discuss ideas and philosophies and concepts, and because they're so influential, they can really shape society from these meetings. And this is what the House of Truth was. This is what Salka Vertel's home was. The Leon Feuchtwanger's in Los Angeles to do with Huxley. This is just an incredibly intriguing area of research. And I encourage everybody to go and read some of these articles that we've done the same thing with Huxley. And it seems like we're getting a little deeper there as well. A lot of people are familiar with Huxley being some sort of social engineer. Well, we get into the detail and exactly how they infiltrated film noir and used it as a deliberate demoralization of the American viewer of movies. So I'll try to stay focused here on the House of Truth until we can get through this. We can see that Frankfurter is being paid for his time at Harvard, because he leaves the House of Truth to start teaching at Harvard Law, and he's there for quite a while. And so you can see that they're mentoring the young lawyers, and really it is through Brandeis Frankfurter and these men that they shape U.S. law to this day. So they're really considered founders of the way that we deal with law, case law. And a lot of people wouldn't argue when I say that morality really has been removed from, a judge's decision. A lot of times we'll be in an uproar just because we didn't see justice served there. Well, this is why. These are the people involved, just like education, right? So Louis Brandeis, huge figure on the international movement. So we start to talk about how progressivism isn't just an American domestic policy, but the same men then used the Paris Peace Conference to establish it on an international level. Louis Brandeis is really the leader of the Zionist movement at that point, even more influential than Chaim Weizmann. This is very public. Everybody knows it at the time. And so he's helping fund Frankfurter, but we see Julian Mack, Rosenwald, and Paul Warburg funding Felix Frankfurter.
When did the Zionist delegation start? Like, when did Zionism start, to form itself?
Well, I would say that before the 19th century, there's meetings with Herzl, and this is really formed in the late 1890s. I think 1898 or 1896 is one of the first, or the first Zionist meeting, and this is where they really discuss what the future is going to look like in 100 years, and it looks a lot like today.
Wow.
And Brandeis is really, what they call him is the sage advisor to all. He's the house guest whenever at the House of Truth, him and Oliver Wendell Holmes. But Brandeis also is really considered the architect of the Federal Reserve. Many people point to other faces, but Brandeis is the most influential, close personal advisor to Woodrow Wilson. And many historians, once you start looking into the literature and going, sort of beyond a cursory look and into the documents, a forensic investigation into this, we start to see that Brandeis and his buddies are far more influential in the creation of all of these things that come out of the Zionist movement. And, Brandeis isn't at the Paris Peace Conference as a member of the Zionist delegation there officially, but Frankfurter is. And Frankfurter is an extension of Brandeis. These guys are considered, father, son, brother, brother. There's a mentor apprenticeship. There's a very interesting relationship that goes on there. And so we see that, they called Frankfurter the Kochlöffel. He's like the cooking spoon. He wanted to be in everybody's business, and he was probably one of the most influential. When you see some of the quotes provided by the people that were there and watching, they say that Felix Frankfurter had his toe in nearly every delegation and was one of the most influential figures there, yet we never hear about him there. And it took me quite a while to even find that information. With intent and a will to find it, it still took me some time. So Brandeis comes from this guy here, Louis Naphtali Dembitz. This is why Louis Brandeis changes his middle name to Dembitz in honor of his uncle. And he's a very influential reformist radical. So then we trace that back, and all of a sudden we go back to Germany and into the areas where the Illuminati were created. Okay, so Bavaria, Bohemia, and all of these sort of southern German areas. And so that's as far as our research has gone. I mean, we see other connections going back to the Illuminati there that parallel this. So we're really right on the cusp of publishing how this is really the modern Illuminati. And so if you can then consider and understand that progressivism and this whole milieu here 100 years ago was progressivism, then you can see how those today, using the same language, and a lot of times they will actually quote some of these people in explaining how they are today pushing narratives or pushing society in certain directions. And a lot of people getting behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr. these days, but he's out there quoting Brandeis all the time. So this understanding of the progressive angle really helps you see through the gatekeeping, through the controlled opposition that trips so many people up. Once you understand this, it's a far more sophisticated worldview that you come up with, and you won't get tripped up by certain things because you can understand it through the language, through their behavior. So
Makes sense.
Brandeis establishes the Brandeis Brief. This is really the way that they change the way that law is argued throughout the United States through this Brandeis Brief. If you go back and look, this is a major turning point in how all of those are argued. So this is just evidence of him reforming society, and he's the one that coins scientific management, Louis Brandeis. So, Frankfurter says that the Mueller case, in which Brandeis brings into effect this Brandeis Brief, this way of arguing cases through statistics and facts and the opinion of the expert. Okay. So Frankfurter calls it epoch making, while others call it, quasi-scientific data and imposing negative effects upon society, because statistics and facts can be subjective depending on how you look at it. This is why us at the History of Propaganda and the Bulletproof Pub chase after primary source material from their own lips, from their own hands, because anybody can present facts and manipulate a story and persuade people in the direction that they wish. So this is how they got that into the United States and started radically reforming the U.S. Constitution. And ever since, there's been an attack on all of our freedoms, to the point now where people believe that liberalism means bigger, more efficient government.
Is that where they started to buy science? Buy the scientists, buy the stats, buy, put the money in place for the results that they wanted, not the objective results that, was probably needed.
Yep, that's exactly it. And if we have time today, I'll get to the exact people that started all of that. The very first technical experts that we depended on. And they named it an experimentation in the social and political sciences.
Wow.
So Oliver Wendell Holmes I include here because I think that he is to a certain degree implicit in it, although his dad is very influential in bringing in the first European philosophies into America just before the turn of the century as well. But Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the son, becomes a huge figure in U.S. Supreme Court. I think even to this day, if you asked who were the most famous Supreme Court justices, Oliver Wendell Holmes would be in the top 3. And
He
so they
looks like
use, sorry, go ahead.
He just gonna say he looks like that actor from Blade, the guy with the mustache, that one actor. So that's kind of when that first picture you had with the horns. I was like, that's the
Yeah,
first thing that I
right.
thought of was I don't remember his name, but he's I think have you seen the movie The Blade
I
with that?
have not. No.
Okay, maybe someone may know what that guy's name. He's pretty famous, but he's got
Yeah,
that mustache.
he reminds me of the actor that was in Tombstone.
Tombstone, that's the guy.
Is it the guy? Yeah,
The
no,
guy,
he's one
same
of
guy
my
in
favorite
Blade.
actors. I love that guy. He's
Yeah.
in The Big Lebowski as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can never come up with his name, but I saw the same thing. Facial hair was a big thing back then. A lot of people had magnificent mustaches and beards and, just incredible facial hair. So that is a minor advantage to some of the work that we've done.
You're not doing too shabby yourself in that
Yeah,
department.
right. It's taken me a few years. So the reason why I say that it's the devil's agent is because they all look to Oliver Wendell Holmes as Mephistopheles. You can see a quote here: "This House of Truth is happier every time Mephistopheles crosses its threshold." And so they're talking about every time that Wendell Holmes comes to this political salon and they get into debates about where they want to shape society and where it's got to go. And they're deeply influenced by this Fabian socialist movement of assisting the poor and needy and all of those things that sound good, but are worthy of further consideration and a deeper look into, much like sustainability today, right? We use these words, but we must be careful as to the definitions. And so, one of the things that I've learned through the trivium in this liberal arts is that, I forgot my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay. What's Mephistopheles?
Mephistopheles it's a story of the devil's agent. He comes and does the dirty deeds of the devil. So devil in the details, we're talking about language and definitions. Now I've gathered my thoughts here again about the definitions of words. And so all conflict is found in our failure to define terms. So when people are talking about climate change today, ask them to define, what do you mean by that? Because if they say, well, this human caused heating of the globe, well, okay, that's global warming. Climate change is a natural evolution or a changing of weather patterns. So they're two different things. Scientists will never argue with me. And so what they've been allowed to do now is establish that those that don't believe in the global warming hypothesis are climate deniers. So all conflict is found in our failure to define terms. And when we're out there communicating with people and trying to inform them of what's going on, these are the things we have to be careful of, not getting wrapped up into definitions of words that we recognize as faulty. Okay, because the left and those television watchers, they have a lot of faulty definitions in their head about a lot of things. And so, even those on the right, I don't think it matters what sort of political affiliation you have. Although I will say that those on the right that are trying to hold on to tradition, the conservatives of us, the true conservatives, really see it. And then on the right, through the 1916 or 2016 U.S. election, we really saw the media weaponized, and so the people on the right see a lot of that, whereas the left are almost completely blind to all of this. And so this is how they've been able to establish all of this progressivism. And so when we see liberalism and the Black Lives Matter and spray painting of the cities of New York, this is a radical sort of social reform program that is born out of these people here. and it's all Marxist. It comes from, mid 1800s, the ideas of Marx and their criticisms of capitalism and Western society.
And I looked up the name. I was mistaken about the Blade. That was Chris Christopherson.
Oh,
But the person that you were talking about, the Tombstone, same person from Roadhouse, Sam Elliott.
yes, Sam
So
Elliott. That's the
Sam
man.
Elliott is the guy that looks like that
Yes,
guy.
he
And
very much does.
Wanda has a good comment here.
Sure.
She says these people call evil good and good evil. They have created an inverted world.
Mhm.
History of everything has been infiltrated by their evil intent, including the Bible. And so this is where the perversion really started.
Yep. And man, that is a great comment, because it's a demoralization program. And I use program in the spelling PROGRAMME. Okay. Because this is how they write it when it's a scientific experiment, or, we see a difference in spelling a lot of the times when we're dealing with them. And so demoralization is the key. This is all a demoralization. So the demoralization of the American is, through the film noir, what she's talking about there, the demoralization and how good is bad and bad is good. This is what they did through the film noir. They got the moviegoer's sympathy to go behind uh, serial pedophile killers and against the crooked cop. So when you look at the storylines and the subject matter of all these film noirs, right from the get-go, Jesse, the very first movies ever, even before they had talkies, was, for example, M for Murder. It was about a pedophile that couldn't stop his urges from raping and killing children. Now, in the end, the viewer is sympathizing with that pedophile. Now, I invite everybody to go and look into the Weimar culture and the origins of film noir, because they created a Hayes Code out of it, because there were so many people upset about these movies that were bringing in, content matter like robbery and safe cracking and things like that, but also, homosexual behavior and cheating on your husband and cheating on your wife and scheming your family. And it's really to rip apart the family. And so please go to our bulletproofpub.com, find Hidden in the Shadow of the Sun or the Exhiliterator. These are two other articles that go deep into this and how it was created. That is absolutely correct, that we now 100 years later get behind the wrong thing, because the definitions of everything have been flipped.
Wow, and not just the attack on the family unit, but the attack on the males. The males
Yep.
tend to be the strong to be able to
Mhm.
stop these stuff. So, and then they've adopted the chemical poisoning where now they're messing with hormone disruptors, getting, people to believe that, women are men and men are women. Like there's a lot of
Mhm.
hormone disrupting chemicals that they put in,
Right.
like even just the estrogen that they put into all the cans. So you open up a can of soup, the lining
Mhm.
inside is filled with estrogen. So your family's eating this, can after can. They made cans popularized, but now they're putting estrogen into the hormone disruptor. So women are getting more estrogen, guys are getting more
Mhm.
estrogen, and this is not natural to what our state is supposed to be. So that all is a multi-level faceted attack, not only through law, but also through these chemicals.
Yeah, and if you think about that, that is, altering the definition of what it means to be a man and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I take great offense to any attack on the family, the man or the woman. These are naturally occurring human beings. And to think that, there are nearly 100 different genders, this is all part of this neoliberal push to keep moving, stay in progress, don't answer questions as to the ethical or moral, validity to all of this. Just keep moving forward. And hopefully people like me can voices like myself and yours, or all of those people that oppose this can be quieted, can be pushed to the fringe, and can be, ridiculed through the mainstream media. But, that's not happening here. We are doing our utmost to make sure that everybody is familiar with this. I think that, you and I getting together on your platform and sharing this story is going to do nothing but help here to get this aspect of the New World Order out. So, like people, you bring up that phrase, New World Order, and most normies will laugh at you, except H.G. Wells wrote a book called The New World Order. And when you read it, which I've been doing it the last few days, it goes into Fabian socialism. It goes into all of this detail that is then executed by these people. And so he wrote that book after the House of Truth existed. I think he wrote it in the 40s or late 30s. So it's sometime after this. So he is aware of all of these things are going on, as was Huxley, as was Orwell.
And then you got Bush. He says it right in his speech. We are creating a new world order.
Yes. And so when you go back, like we have 100 years ago, and you start to investigate and look through newspaper magazines and articles and all of that, you find that New World Order is the preferred phrase of choice. It's used all the time. It's just, over time, they've been able to sort of persuade people into thinking that's conspiracy theory when they hear those words. And so, when somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist, I just want to remind everybody that that's a thought terminating cliche fallacy. They're asking you not to think. So just point that out and let them know that you're a thinker and you prefer to think your way through these things. And I think for any successful navigation of our current world, it is an absolute necessity to know where all of this came from, where the origins of it all came from. And this is really what spurred me. Is there was disturbing things going on in our society, and I wanted to know where this all started. And so it brought me here. The House of Truth, the founding of the CFR. And then, so what happens here is that they move to Paris for the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. And so who is there but, Philip Kerr, Eustace Percy. These are two major figures in the Rhodes Roundtable, the establishment of the Rhodes Scholarships and this Anglo-American establishment that many are familiar with. Eustace Percy and Philip Kerr, Lord Lothian, they are major players in this with Lord Milner. They're at Paris Peace Conference. They are as influential on David Lloyd George as a trifecta as Lippmann, Frankfurter, and Brandeis are to Wilson there. And so this is a very strange occurrence to me, that seemingly two disparately different things are, we see the presence of the same individuals. It's basically a House of Truth homecoming when they all arrive in Paris. And so, Lippmann writes Public Opinion in 1920, and it opens in Plato's cave. And he talks about, the world outside and the images in our head, and how the media influences and creates images in our head. So when it doesn't take much to really break down the word television and see what is going on here, is that they are really creating an illusionary world that and it's all out of this search for the greater society, this perfect society, really, and a utopian future that they were looking for. And so now we are talking about unattainable ideals and noble lies, and these are ways to influence these intellectuals that are coming out of Harvard and Yale. This is a way to influence them by establishing a noble lie, that is that we are going to alleviate the poor and needy, and that they are going to be a part of it. But, to completely eliminate poverty or inequality in our world is an impossibility. It's unattainable. We are all born different. So they establish these things that sound great and, to a lot of people are worth the effort to see if we could make it possible. But really it's a futile effort, right? We can all, unless all of us start to decide to be as well developed and conscientious of others as we can be, Now, at this point in our society, I don't see, that happening all at once, but, programs like this and information presented like this can help. So,
Were you working in the World Trade Center before? Did I read that correctly? Was
yeah,
that you?
I
So
was,
because Laura just made a comment
mhm,
from our Facebook, Laura Waitman says many people somehow did not go to work on 9/11, including
yeah,
our Bill, who rarely went to work though.
right. Yep, there's all kinds of crazy stuff associated with that. And so, 1999, I became a financial advisor, early 2000, for Solomon Smith Barney. And so I went from being a shipping receiving supervisor to a financial advisor for one of the largest financial companies in the world. And so Solomon Smith Barney kept all of their records in World Trade Center 7. And I had just quit that job months before 9/11 happened. And when I saw World Trade Center fall at 5:30, or when I found that out, it really solidified my decision. It really helped me say, yeah, you know what, I made the right decision getting out of there. And so, I was awake before that, I would say, but that really sort of showed the scale upon which this plan has been going. And so that was a real catalyst for me to find out more. Then the 2008 crash as well. And the fact that, Occupy Wall Street came out, but nothing happened. And so, through our history and through our investigation, we found all kinds of committees and investigations into all of this stuff: the Cox Committee, the Reese Committee, the Walsh Committee, uh, dozens of them have all looked into this, all of these aspects that we complain about today. And all of them were settled with nobody held to blame. Nobody was guilty. And so this is why we see JP Morgan still today as, a highly influential bank internationally, not just in the United States, but, they've been able to sort of escape any ridicule. And they do this because they took over the entire media by then. 1917, there's congressional record in which people are saying that, the media can't be trusted anymore because of Morganization. This monopolization of capitalism that is really at the heart of the issue, I think, is that not necessarily capitalism, but the monopolization of it into, what we have today, 6 giant organizations or less that control our media, our education, basically everything.
They say
Food.
6, but it's all one. They're all
Yeah.
working. They're all working together, and it's really condensed to 6. But really, it's under one umbrella. They don't seem to be working against each other. It seems like they're all on that same inverted, perverted team.
Yep. And they are, certainly. And, this is because they come from different places and different names. It seems like they're unaffiliated. So this is how you can get away with, peer review. In behind the scenes, behind closed doors, they're buddies, but on sort of a public platform or stage, they don't acknowledge each other as such. And so this is how, peer review has been used to manipulate. So can you
Just
see a
just
group of
one just
Yep,
one
go
thing, the
ahead.
same thing as the controlled opposition. You
Mm-hmm.
have the Fox News would be, where people would go,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really they're controlled, but you see them fighting at each other. Fox
Yep.
is, outing these other people, so people tend to want to trust Fox more,
Mm-hmm.
because they're kind of the black sheep of the media, but yet they're all under the same umbrella because, we just saw, like, with what happened to Tucker, he
Mm-hmm.
was saying too much, talking about the war, where the war machine, talking about the pharmaceuticals, where he was no longer, it seemed, to be controlled as much, whether, we see how far that controlled actually was, but it seemed like they had to oust him and they didn't care that their ratings have dropped 40%,
Right.
for taking out their most popular, spokesperson.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so then I would say about Tucker Carlson is that he comes from a secret society. And, Fox, probably that was created in my lifetime in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. I remember it coming aboard. And, it is of my opinion now, how many ever years later, that, Fox was created in the way that it is today as a dialectic. as an opposition, like you say, as a way to sort of corral and, coerce and persuade the American public, still into a liberal minded, um, you know, their goal in Paris was to create a liberal minded world. And so we must be careful when we even deal with mainstream media at all. I advise everybody to turn off your television. I say this all the time. There's no need to enable or entertain anything that's going on there. These people are losers. And we are creating the greatest, most beautiful, effective, efficient argument against what they are, pushing us all into this new world order. Well, we have a choice and a chance now. This generation of people, we have an extraordinary opportunity to recreate the world in the image that we want, not what the Fabian socialists want, because that is a subjugation of our individual ability to imagine, to be curious, to ask questions, to be who we want to be, to express our individuality, to be human. Okay, this is really where I want to spend a lot of my time in discussion, is on the human level, on the moral and ethical aspects of whether this is good for our humanity, because that becomes an indefatigable argument in the face of singularity or the artificial intelligence, because their goal is no humanity. So you asked earlier, or you'd mentioned earlier, about the first ever scientific experts.
Yeah, where they started to adopt science and kind of mold it, instead of, science is settled. Well, science is
Right.
never supposed to be settled, but
Right.
they try to program people by creating these fake scientific narratives and, creating the science that they want. And anything that goes against their science is now, defunded. They're set up, they're killed. A lot of these things happen to anybody who's got an actual a voice, a platform. They have to control, manipulate, discredit, or kill.
That is exactly correct. And so, is there a picture on the screen of a bunch of gentlemen in suits there?
No, we just have words. It says knowledgeable citizenry. We see what happens. If you click to if you have to click to another share screen. And this is great work, brother. This is great.
Thank you.
Like
Thank
people
you
are
very much.
people are saying, love this history. Yeah, it's good for people to know where the origins, because it just gives you more ammo when you're having to, or more tools in your arsenal belts, maybe better to say, when you are discussing things with the ones that are truly programmed and the ones that are still defending this new world order way of life.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate everybody that's listening now and watching and has the interest in this, because really there's a lot of work that's gone into this, not only on my behalf, but Jan Soleil has been our web designer at bulletproofpub.com, and it's just been a great influence and inspiration for me, and there are many people around me that have helped establish all of this. This hasn't just been done by me, and I really appreciate all that. I certainly appreciate everybody listening today and that have interest and see that the importance of this. Okay, so let me introduce to you people the very first scientific experts. Can you see the gentlemen in suits now?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the inquiry. And many of the founding members of the CFR are found here, the Council on Foreign Relations. So when we look at today, Jesse, one of the major organizations that is creating the downfall of the West is the Council on Foreign Relations. This is really a collection of all of those things that we thought shouldn't be put together. The media, politicians, the experts, the rich, the elite, right? This is really a congregation place, the Council on Foreign Relations, and it is no different than these gentlemen's clubs that we mentioned earlier, the Century Club. They're all, members of multiple of these gentlemen's clubs, not just the CFR.
Can you make this image bigger and just kind of go by each one so everybody can
Sure.
kind of see the name? So
Yeah. If you
yeah,
can't read that, I
yeah, I can read
apologize.
that now.
Okay. So along the top, on the very bottom left, you see Shotwell there, guy with a mustache. He's Canadian Quaker, and he was really the guy that was asked by Herbert Crowley. If we remember who Herbert Crowley is, he's the founder of the New Republic and the writer of The Promise of American Life that influenced the progressive movement. James T. Shotwell is deep into that collection too. Crowley calls Shotwell and says, "Can you get together some social and political scientists with the intent of creating and finding all of the information that the American delegation is going to need in Paris to influence the world in the direction that we want?" And what we see at Paris is really they take control. These are the advisors to Wilson. If you go into some of our other work, it actually might be in this article. We might stumble on it, but you see the actual organization written on paper and how influential it is. Many of these men during the Paris Peace Conference go off to do reports either in Poland or meeting with Lenin himself as to, they're trying to figure out what the Bolsheviks were up to at that point. And I haven't been able to determine just how sort of coordinated they were, but we see that these guys all come from a liberal arts background. They all come from the Ivy League, and they are deeply influential in the creation of our history. Charles Seymour, he's Skull and Bones, founding father CFR, but he's got a double Bachelor of Arts. So this guy is one of the smartest guys here. And he ends up being president at Yale some years later for a long time. He is actually related to Clive Hart Day, who's down in the bottom right. He is Yale Skull and Bones as well. So we start to see the infiltration of Skull and Bones, and probably not even an infiltration. It was purposely put in there because, William Howard Taft and the League to Enforce Peace is very influential in the creation of the League of Nations. And these are the authors of it right here. These are the people that wrote it. So they're considered the first ever technical experts. And this is really where we see the first time where political leaders start leaning on these private professors. And again, it's controversial. It's highly contentious because they're allowed to just go back into their private life and not face any of these consequences. So probably the most important guy to know here is this handsome gentleman here, Isaiah Bowman. Okay, he was the chief executive officer. He's the leader of this inquiry movement. They do a lot of their preliminary work for Paris at the American Geographical Society at 3755 Broadway in New York that still exists. This is really where I think that this is really the birthplace of the CFR. And Isaiah Bowman is running the whole show. He's Harvard MA, Yale PhD. He's teaching at Yale, and he's really a real life Indiana Jones. We've done some videos on him, and we're going to finish a 3-part series here in my next off season on him because he's just an intriguing figure. He's really the personification of the New World Order. He's traveling to South America 3 times, 1907, 1911, 1913. He's the one that, along with Hiram Bingham, rediscovers Machu Picchu. And so they're down there investigating like these strange rock formations that are in South America. These are the first guys to ever show up once the West sort of heard of these things. He's going there
probably buying all the land up, whether it's important land, investing, stealing the land or whatever it is that they probably did.
And this is before planes. So this is just before air reconnaissance. So they're doing all the reconnaissance on the ground. He's got his surveyors and a large group of people that go with him on these things. And it is really the establishment of the international map on a 1 to 1 million scale. So you're able to see all of the detail of geography of countries. And really, I think that, I've stated that this is the very first rudimentary steps of our surveillance grid. It was the creation of this international map of the world, and Isaiah Bowman has a huge influence on that. He does everything south of the Rio Grande, all the way to the tip of South America, and he documents it on foot with help, muleback and all of these things. And so he's really the leader. We have child proteges in here. You see that they're all affiliated with history. Charles Homer Haskins, at that time, he's on the board of those that determine what history the children want to learn in elementary and high school. So you want to talk a gatekeeper, there he is.
Elizabeth's comment here is these people go back to the Jesuits and the Vatican. Many secret societies throughout the centuries are all involved in the club of elites and bloodlines.
Sure. And actually, I start this article talking about the Pope's influence and how I think that what the Pope did was create a dialectic. The World War was at a point where, it's the first time that anybody had ever seen a world war, and it was atrocious. Some of the reports that were coming back were just really staggering. And so it was a note to all the belligerents from Pope Pius XIV, I think. And he called for all of the belligerents to get together and create an international organization instead of this traditional material force of arms, like killing each other with guns and bullets. He's really the one that comes up with the idea publicly. And so, for a lot of people, who better than the Pope to come up with some sort of idea like that, right?
Wow.
And so, yep, he and the Vatican are deeply influential in all of this. They are a player in it. It's just an area that I haven't gone down yet to really establish, substantially with provenance. But I mean, we're taking his quotes and seeing how he fits right into this. So we talked about the expert. This is how they manufacture public consent, right? Year 2023, we just passed the 100th anniversary of both Walter Lippmann's Public Opinion and Edward Bernays' The Crystallizing of Public Opinion. So these two books, if you're serious about understanding our world, they're must reads. They're fairly quick reads, but amazing admissions in there where Walter Lippmann talks of the expert as the entering wedge. And so the middle management, we saw the entrance of the middle manager in the late 20th century. Now we see it everywhere. What this really is removing everybody from source, right? Just as the Pope is going to remove you from the source of our creator, or a professor is going to remove us from the source of information, or the media removes us from source of, the daily happenings of our world. This is one of the things that we all must be aware of. Am I being removed from source, or am I being removed to have, are they taking away my ability to research for myself and come up with determinations through my own consideration? So this is one thing, when you feel yourself being removed, that you must pay attention to, because this is one of the things that they do. This is one of the most defining characteristics of these New World Order players, is they want to be your source of information, like the news says, right? Everything you need to know. We're the source of all information. And back when Hillary emails were being exposed, they were even saying on CNN that it was illegal to look at those, even though it's not. So you see this technical expert, you see the formation, it's deliberate. These people are complicit in it to varying degrees. I would say that there's some compartmentalization there, but all of them come from an Atlanticist sort of worldview, the Anglophile. Just this liberal minded, they're all liberally minded over there. There was no conservatives or Republicans invited to Paris Peace Conference in the American delegation. They're all of the same mind. So you can see why then there was such uproar when they tried to pass it through law in the US. This is really where the League of Nations, hypothetically disappeared. But when we look at the League of Nations and the Charter of the UN, and those that created it. Many of the people that created the UN are inquiry members, and were also there in the creation of the League of Nations in 1919. So you think about that. That's 1919. They created the League of Nations. We think it fails, but it's really resurrected through the United Nations and signed into reality in 1945. So that's 26 years later. We still have at least 7 members of the inquiry that were responsible in the creation of the League of Nations there at the UN in San Francisco signing those documents. So we talk about ominous continuity. This is one of the things that we see all the time. And so here's a quote I pulled from Liberty and the News. This is really where we find the first use of manufacture of consent. You know, a lot of people point to the public opinion, 1921. Well, he actually had it in Liberty and News, and only a guy like me that would go into these books would actually discover that. So I provide this for everybody to look at, including the page numbers. And one other thing with bulletproofpub.com, Jan has done such a great job there that a lot of these books that we've cited and used as provenance are there in our library. You can go look. And if it's not, go on to archive.org. And if it's out of print, it's going to be there. And so Lippmann says in Liberty and the News that everywhere today men must deal with questions more intricate than any church or school had prepared them to understand. Increasingly, they know that they cannot understand them if the facts are not quickly and steadily available. Increasingly, they are baffled because the facts are not available. And they are wondering whether government by consent can survive in a time when the manufacture of consent is an unregulated private enterprise. So he's speaking of, you know, sort of the fascist underpinnings as to, you know, how we think. So there's the cover of his public opinion.
Someone asked if, you know, we knew about what the 13 families and their bloodlines. I've actually got an image, and it says the 13 families that you think ruled the world: the Astors, the Bundys, Collins, DuPont, Freemans, Kennedy, Lee, Onassis, Reynolds, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Russell, and Van Doon. But those are just the public ones. With the ones that are actually in behind the scenes are the Borgias, Breakspear, Somalia, Orsini's, Conti's, Chigi, Colonna, Farnese, Medici, Gaetani, Pamphili, Este, and Aldobrandini. So those are the actual ones, but nobody knows about those because they don't want people to know about them. They give you the ones just in case they ever have to, you know, give people something. If people become aware and they have to appease the masses, they can give away the names that I first were, you know, let's give up the Rothschilds or give up, you know, the Kennedys or some of these names, you know, because then that would appease the public, while the ones who are really pulling the strings get, you know, can still do that with nobody knowing who's doing that in the background.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, I consider myself a pretty deep researcher, and a lot of those names, the second group that you mentioned that are more secretive, a lot of those I haven't even heard of. So it really speaks to that point that, you know, we got to get deeper in our research. We've got to really identify those families that are most influential on this level. The Rothschilds are deeply influential. So are the Warburgs and these more public names, because, you know, a lot of these meetings at Paris are done on the property of Rothschild. You know, Rothschild has made a lot of this possible. He's the one that donates Israel, you know. So, you know, they're meeting and having these meetings as to where they want to go internationally on the grounds of Rothschild property that's been, you know, made available to them through the Rothschilds. And, you know, in another story that I wrote about the origins of genetics, you know, the Rothschilds are at these first formal meetings that create what we know today as genetics. So they're there. And one of the things that has always baffled me is, where are the Rothschilds getting their talking points from, and who's directing them? And so this is honestly where I want to go. I want to find the truth of it all. And I think it is possible. It's just going to take some work, and maybe it's going to be a collective work of a bunch of people working together to find this. And so, yeah.
I'll send you that list of names because
Sure.
on that second list is where the only one that's not on that list is what's the I forget. There's one name that's not on the list, but if you just take, let's say, the Farnese, the Farnese have an actual Pentagon compound. So they're the ones who actually funded the Pentagon. So they're the ones who technically own and control the Pentagon in the United States, the military arm of the Vatican. So,
Right.
those are the actual names. So that's kind of a little bit about that history and background where the Pentagon came from, was actually
Right.
that family who's got an actually compound that looks like the Pentagon in Europe. So they just duplicated that in, United States to be the military arm of their, empire.
Right. That's very interesting. I did not know that. So back to the technical expert, I really want to establish that this is out of the minds of Lippmann and the inquiry that this comes from. And I pulled a quote from chapter 25, and that chapter is called The Entering Wedge. So he's discussing the technical expert, and he says, the Great Society had grown so furiously and to colossal dimensions by the application of technical knowledge. It was made by engineers who had learned to use exact measurements in quantitative analysis. It could not be governed, men began to discover, by men who thought deductively about rights and wrongs. It could be brought under human control only by the technic which had created it. So you can see that's happening today.
100%.
Without very little imagination, you can see that that's exactly what's happening today. And so I provide the actual page. So this is forensic history sort of in the moment right here. We're taking page 370. I'm highlighting it. I'm putting it up here and then elaborating on what that means as far as I'm considering it. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a very important aspect. The most amazing part about all of this research is there are multiple layers that start to answer all of these questions that maybe the COVID awake are asking, and maybe even 9/11 awake and Oklahoma City bombing awake, going way back. A lot of this clicked together for me when I started to look into this, that these are the actual tangible machinations of the New World Order, not just some esoteric sort of metaphysical thing that we can't put our hands on, because this is what I wanted to do, was find something tangible that we can point to. And conveniently enough for us, we've had 20 years of hindsight. So what is more valuable, or 100 years of hindsight? So what is more valuable than 100 years of hindsight to see whether these decisions that they made 100 years ago have, borne the fruit that we want? And it's very clearly that that's not the case for anybody that wants to maintain their individuality, imagination, and their freedom to speak and think. And so it's an all-out assault, really. And maybe I can come back for another episode and we can get deeper into Huxley.
For sure.
And so, Huxley kind of is a personification of what we were just discussing about how these families are in behind the scenes, but there's other names that are public. Because when we look into the MK Ultra paperwork, we see Sidney Gottlieb's name is the only one that's not redacted. Now, I believe that that's because they're covering for Aldous Huxley. I say and prove as far as I can that Aldous Huxley was actually the head of MK Ultra. He's he's the inspiration for Esalen and the human potential movement. And, he moves to Los Angeles shortly after writing A Brave New World. And those exiles that were running from Germany at that time were in Sanary-sur-Mer, south of France, in the same community as Huxley when he was writing A Brave New World. So they all go over to LA at the same time, and all of them infiltrate Hollywood with film scripts and stories and start to influence Hollywood in the creation of the film noir. So Sidney Gottlieb's name being the only one not redacted makes people think that he was involved. I'm not sure as to how deep he was involved, but I believe it's because they are hiding Huxley behind all of that.
course, they give a name for someone to, deflect from who's really pulling the strings. So if you
Yeah.
think it's, Sidney Gottlieb, then now you've got, a name to focus on instead of the ones who are actually pushing the buttons.
Right. And so then, we went into that deep research. We started to look just how influential was Huxley. And so we found that he is actually involved in the creation of the League of Nations. So, a lot of people only know cursory information on the Paris Peace Conference, and they might tell you something about Woodrow Wilson and the creation of the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles. But, Woodrow Wilson had nothing to do with it. He's just a nice grandfatherly face to put in front and to help, uh, make people trust, right? To sort of eliminate any hesitancy that they would have, because they're far more likely to trust and believe somebody like Woodrow Wilson than they are some of these other characters.
Of course.
So
Like
the end,
Jimmy Carter was one of those trustable,
yeah,
lovable people that they put into place. Most of the ones, the presidents, I believe, they're all just been really puppets.
yep,
I think Obama is pretty deep into the maniacal scheme of things. So I
mm-hmm,
think he's one of the first real bad ones that,
mm-hmm,
were in there. But I think most of the other ones were just following orders that weren't actually involved in some of this deep, devious things
yeah.
that in the inner workings.
I would agree that Obama has a level of complicity to him that, a lot of presidents didn't. But, regardless of whatever president was in there, this progressive platform and the advancement of technology has gone on. And the patriotism and nationalism and this, warmongering that has gone on, and, killing people from a good safe distance, this Western American foreign policy that still today pundits will call Wilsonianism still exists and it's still going. So, we see NATO and its influence in Ukraine. This is the same milieu that NATO comes from. This is when you look at the charter of NATO and the League of Nations and the 14-point speech of Woodrow Wilson, it's the exact same thing. There's very little difference into, their talking points and their goals and what they wanted. So a lot of these guys, like I mentioned earlier, they are members of multiple gentlemen's clubs, and the most pronounced, okay, when we look at a Venn diagram or a Vesica Pisces, there is the Pilgrim Society, links them all. And so this is like an international established organization that within which you're going to find, the American progressives and the Fabian socialists. And so they use these groups to influence and persuade. And so the Bryce group is one of these, less understood groups of people that deeply influenced the creation of the League of Nations. Now, the interesting thing about our first Viscount James Bryce and this Bryce report is they were also the ones to get Britain into the war in 1914 through the alleged German outrages report. Okay, this is authored by that guy with the cigar there. And this is really looked at as an instigator for getting Britain involved into the war in 1914. So he's there to start the war, and he's there to write what post-war world is going to look like. So you want to talk complicity, that's one right there. First Viscount James Bryce, deeply influential. And within that group, you find a, collaboration of all of these people, whether they're Rhodes Roundtable inquiry members, progressives, Fabian socialists, or artists or intellects, scholars like Aldous Huxley or Bertrand Russell, right? These people that we never knew were deeply involved in the creation of the League of Nations are there. So the League to Enforce Peace is the second group, and this is the Phi Beta Kappa Skull and Bones. This is where Taft, Stimson, Root, these militarist, patriotic founders of the efficiency and preparedness movement. They're the two main pillars of progressivism. They wanted an efficient workforce and then a prepared military. So really, we see in a lot of ways America is no different today, and just a further imagination of that from 100 years ago. This is what we've developed into out of those ideas. Okay. And so I also point out here that both on the Pilgrims logo and the Council on Foreign Relations, we have this word, ubique, and that means everywhere. So, this is what we see, that they are now everywhere. So within the League of Nations Union, you find, leaders of the British Foreign Office, Sir Edward Grey, men like this, that are in Paris as well. So they're, regardless of what country they're from at Paris, they're all influential in the creation of the League of Nations, and they're all personal friends. Right. So I just include some of the names that are involved in these groups, and we see all of the familiar ones. And we see JP Morgan Council. We see JP Morgan deeply influential in Paris Peace Conference. He's got 2 representatives there. And, he had a lot of money to get back from the Brits, the French, and the Russians. He had loaned a lot of money. And so really that's what this was about. This Paris Peace Conference isn't, a peace conference to end all war. It was really to get back the money that had been lost through JP Morgan. This is what I really see as the most motivating factor when I get into the literature is economics, not world peace. Because world peace, another unattainable ideal. So the 1917 Club is where we find Aldous Huxley, but we also find the founder of this is Leonard Woolf and Oliver Strachey. So this is Virginia Woolf. This is the Bloomsbury set. Some intellectuals like Huxley, like Bertrand Russell, the Cambridge Apostles, and these very influential social influencers, these high-level strategists. And so we see that Rothschilds is there, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now he is one of the most influential, and actually right there's Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein are 2 of the 3 most influential philosophers of the 20th century. And, from their circle comes tons of trees, right, that branch off from their thinking, and we are deeply influenced under their thinking even today. And they embrace German philosophy, going back to your point a while back.
Do you know what the 322 means in the Skull and Bones?
I do not.
So I'll just read here. So March 22nd, which is March 3, 22, and the number 32 is connected to Skull and Bones and the 33-degree Masons. This is also related to the fact that water freezes at 32 degrees, but stays liquid at 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Skull and Bones uses 322 as a day of spiritual warfare. That's the day that they do sacrificial rituals using Geronimo's skull in black magic ceremonies. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wore number 33 for the Lakers, so Magic Johnson was forced to wear the number 32. Larry Bird wore the number 33, and Kevin McHale wore the number 32. Even President McKinley was assassinated with a 32 caliber pistol. O.J. Simpson wore number 32 during his whole career.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's amazing. I don't know even what to say to that. Other, like when you say water freezes, that really catches my attention, because really that's what a liberal arts degree is a deep search into the natural laws of our world, right? Astronomy and music, it's time and space, and how that's manipulated within our environment. So, that's the one thing that sticks with me out of that, is that, yeah, they are very familiar with the natural ways of our world. As we all know, this could be only exclusive to us here, as to, the laws of nature and how they interact. I mean, it could be completely different somewhere else. And so, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know about the numbers on their uniforms and just how influential they were or how complicit they were. Probably not, being athletes, but they're still being used as influencers in society. You know, LeBron James tells us to eat Big Macs even today, you know, and is paid millions of dollars to do those things. And so, yeah, that's the argumentum ad verecundium, the appeal to celebrity. And so, you know, this is actually, that's the two-step flow of communication that Lazarsfeld talked about. You know, how the media message gets sent through people like Oprah Winfrey and George Clooney and Zuckerberg and creates this false consensus. So, you know, this is how they established their COVID mandatory rules, all of that stuff really was through opinion, and opinion of, you know, popular opinion or opinion of the masses, which itself is a logical fallacy, the argumentum ad populum. So we must be careful on what we start building, what we think is going on, and make sure that we don't build them on logical fallacy. So, you know, here on this screen is probably one of the best ways to do that. Go look into these books and the literature that they've written. So you can see the proceedings of the Inter-Allied Labor Conference. This is London 1918. So this is just before the opening of the Paris Peace Conference. And we find here that this is really within this book, the proceedings of the Inter-Allied Labor Conferences, which were also known as the Inter-Allied Labor and Socialist Conferences, where the League of Nations is created. And who is chairing these but Sidney Webb? And who is there but George Bernard Shaw? And, you know, what is the message, overlying message here but Fabian socialism? And so we see that, you know, even our Western progressives are citing and quoting Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw. Walter Lippmann is as close a personal friend to George Wallace as there could be. And Wallace is another one of the founders of Fabianism. Okay, so when Walter Lippmann travels to Europe, he stays with Graham Wallace, who coincidentally enough wrote The Great Society. He was the first to ever coin that term. So deeper into these, we see the actual documents with the signatures, League to Enforce Peace. That's William Howard Taft's group, right? And so again, we've left these books for you to go and consider for yourself, because I'm not going to get in your way and remove you from anything. I want you to go and look at these books. You can see that they're authentic. And, you know, basically within those pages is the story of us, their children of the future, for which they are making all of these changes. And, you know, these many years later, you know, we're finding fault in some of that thinking. And so we want everybody to know this information so that we can get everybody to more successfully navigate this political environment. The more you understand where you're at, the easier you can get around. You know, like a mouse in a maze. The more you know, the better you can go. And so this stuff to me really changed my life in knowing the inner workings of how we are being, you know, coerced into slavery or wage slavery. This 100 years of slavery of factory workers. This is really what I want to show, you know, and we provide the source material as best as we can. So we show the memberships according to Frederick C. Nathan, you know, the centurions that are involved. And, you know, it names all three presidents of the 1912 election, and then many of the names that are influential in the creation of the League of Nations. So, you know, we're not just saying things out loud because it sounds good. We're actually allowing the information to influence us. We are considering them when we see it. We're going through the proper vetting of it. We're asking the who, what, why, where, when. We're getting logical about this. And so I think that because we are following this process and being honest with ourselves, I think this is really what has enabled us to sort of get to the cutting edge of this. I know that there's other authors and there's other great works out there, you know, that are expressing all of this and have since before I was born, but it certainly isn't as public as we need it to be today. And so I'm hoping I'm doing a decent job here explaining just sort of the deeper contexts and the ideas. Not necessarily are you going to see a jackboot coming down upon you. It's more of the ideas that fall on your brain as a veil would. They're more subtle and soft. This is, you know, the origins of soft science is political and social sciences. And so it is of my opinion, after all of this research, that we've been able to identify those organizations most harmful to Western tradition and value, and we could systematically, surgically take them out of society and immediately be better off. And so some of those organizations are obvious, but anything to do with social research and applied science should be eliminated from our society. All it is doing is researching our behavior and finding ways to further manipulate us.
Yeah, manipulate
Okay.
it. You're doing a great job. We do have a couple questions here.
Sure.
One comes from Michelle. She says, has he heard of the Rerum Novarum in Silical of Pope Leo in having peace of the apostles' rights and duties of capital labor?
No. I would
Okay.
like to see how that's written for the spelling, but no, none of that rings a bell to me.
Okay.
You can find me, Michelle, on Facebook under Duane Hayes or Diego Garcia. You want to come talk to me about that stuff, provide some sources, and I'd love to see it.
And then the next question was, is the Magna Carta associated with this?
I don't know. I think it's definitely part of the story. And, you know, I haven't done a lot of research into the Magna Carta. I know
it was much earlier. So some of
Yes.
this stuff would have been adopted from stuff
Mhm.
like the Magna Carta. People
Yep,
believe
it
the
certainly
Magna
was.
Carta was a good document to
Mhm.
protect the slaves or the commoners, but it was actually
Mhm.
to protect the barons. It wasn't to
Right.
protect. So again, so some of the people believe, oh, the Constitution is great, it protects our rights, but then
Mhm.
other people believe the Constitution was written again to
Mhm.
protect them, and that's why they keep on creating these new laws and new bylaws and new amendments and all these things to further protect them, which they don't have to follow the same rules as everyone else does, because as we
Mhm.
see, you know, most of the people that are involved in these upper echelons never come to justice for any of the stuff that they've, you know,
That's
get
correct.
visibly caught doing.
Yeah, and I would say to that as far as the US Constitution goes, through much of my research, they identify, and we can say Felix Frankfurter, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Walter Lippmann, James T. Shotwell, in their writings, even Lord Milner in his book called The Great Experiment about the League of Nations, that the US Constitution was the biggest obstacle to a supranational organization such as the UN. And it is really the reason why it was so difficult to establish in the United States. This is their story, the official sort of story of the life of the League of Nations. Now, they admit in their work several times that the US Constitution was the biggest obstacle. Now, I don't know if that was because of the document itself or the people's belief in it, but this is some of the admissions they make, and you can consider whether this is being used as a dialectic or not. But I tend to believe that, you know, the US Constitution is an important document because they have established the viewpoint that it was an obstacle. We should be careful on, you know, who we trust and all of that. And I am familiar with the concept that the US Constitution, the Magna Carta, may have been, you know, used against our own self-interest. But they do state that this work against the US Constitution was experimental and it was radical and it was an obstacle to their goal of a international organization to, you know, stop the imposition of material force of arms. So I hear you. I tend to agree there. I am careful in what I want to, you know, commit to fact and to move from belief to knowledge. And so this is where I'm careful as to my own personal biases. And, you know, it would be great to be able to say that, but I'm just here to present the material. We can all have a look at it for ourselves, it's important for all of us to consider it, because there are viewpoints out there that are further along than mine. And a lot of times people bring up, you know, opinions and ideas that I didn't even think of. So at this point, I'm willing to say that the US Constitution is a good document in that it allows us, at least there is some sort of written record that says that, you know, we're free to speak and think what we want. And we know today that, you know, there's an attack on all of that. And we've been able to trace that all of that comes back to what we've been talking about here. And so I tend to think that the US Constitution is still a decent document, but, you know, with evidence, I can be easily persuaded.
Look to
So,
some of the origins of the people who put that together and their Freemason ties. So
right.
a lot of them are Freemasons. So are
Right.
the Freemasons going to write a document that are going to protect them and their, pyramid structure, or
Mhm.
are they going to write a document that's more written for the people to protect the people? So I think if you look, in those kind of routes may
Mhm.
kind of show you some factual places of who and why they maybe wrote this document.
Yeah, and I'm more than welcoming people to bring me sources and provenance to show me these kinds of things. And I would say that it's, irregardless of all of that, we are showing 100 years of history, and we can see that these actions have led to, what is going on in our world today. So this is one of the things that I tried to do, was to stay out of conspiratorial history and just establish things through evidence and primary source material. Because if we're not being, emotionally tugged in certain ways, it's a lot easier for us to find the truth. And
And much more
so,
believable when you present the evidence of
right.
actually being factual opposed to your
Hmm.
opinion.
Right. Yep. And so I can offer my opinion and I can speculate like all of us. I do. But I will also, indicate when I'm doing that. And other than that, I just tend to share as much real information as I can. We were talking about the Freemasonry. Well, this they are deeply involved in all of this. We get into the House of Truth. One of these characters is Gutzon Borglum, that creates Mount Rushmore. Well, he's a Freemason, and so is Theodore Roosevelt, and they're deeply close friends. So it doesn't take long before you find the Freemasons. I would say that they're highly present
Involved
through
in most
all of
things.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I just found that the Skull and Bones and the Phi Beta Kappa aspect to all of this was far more provable and interesting to me. And then it also opened up a whole new realm of investigation and pushed sort of into the light some more history, which was important. And I didn't have to face a lot of the sort of backlash as soon as I mentioned Freemasonry. So I mention it as I mention the ethnic backgrounds of some of these men, whom most of them are. But again, I'm just presenting information as unbiased as I can. And hopefully, your viewers and those that read our articles and consume this information can see what we're trying to lay down here. That, our world is really largely controlled by the elites, and here it is. Here's what everybody needs to look at.
This is great work, brother. And yeah, you're more than welcome to come back anytime. I really
Cool.
like you, your demeanor, your knowledge, and your presentation is great. So you're doing
That's
a great
great.
job here.
Thank you. So how much time do we still have?
Well, in 7 minutes, it's 2 hours, but we
Mhm.
can go over if, there's more stuff that you want to present today, or we can wrap up at the 2 hours and then
Yeah.
bring you back. Like we can do whatever you want here.
Okay. I certainly appreciate everything, Jesse. And I would say that I should probably go, because my wife and our new friend slash employee are up at the farm right now taking care of things. And, they're more than capable, but I'd love to get back up to the farm and get back to what I was doing. So maybe let's stop it at 2 hours. This is a lot of information for people to consume. It might give them an opportunity to come visit us at the History of Propaganda and the Bulletproof Pub and sort of acclimate or orient themselves to what we're putting down. And it would make for a great show if we could come back, Jesse, and talk more MK Ultra and Aldous Huxley's influence on society.
Sure, that would be great. We still got about 70 people watching here live right
Cool.
now. We've had between 70 and 110
Nice.
watching live here. So this is going to get out to thousands of people. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so the more the better.
So allow me to end here maybe on the conclusion, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So what happened at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919? We're talking about the Paris Peace Conference. To answer Gregory Bateson's question at the beginning, is more than just the signing of a treaty. The meeting in Paris profoundly shifted world hegemony westward. And when the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 is taken in its broadest sense, we can clearly see without a doubt that this is where nearly everything we struggle to navigate today found its modern origins. So it's where the U.S. formally becomes the New World postgraduate understudy to the Old World British Imperial Emeritus. So it's really comes out of this old Imperial British movement that the American progressives find their inspiration. Okay. And so, we can look at, like I said, 100 years of hindsight. This was supposed to be the Great War, was supposed to end all war. Well, we can see that war has been, perpetual ever since. And it's gotten to the point now where we're on the verge of having autonomous aircraft carriers and drones. And so where's the humanity there? I don't know. I don't see it. And so, also Future Perfect Part 2 gets into the ominous continuity that is involved here, the familial lineage that exists between father and son, and the initial implementation of the expert and really the birth of the technocratic age into technocracy of the 30s, the Macy conferences and the MK Ultra. There's a deep connection here through family that we can get into in the next episode. So I just want to say thanks, Jesse, and this also, that the more I research, the more optimistic I become, because the more real these things are when you can see them, point to them, and name names and places, events and organizations. And so the deeper I've gone into this research, the more solvable this problem becomes. And so I just invite everybody to sort of keep a positive mindset as to what's going on. Start reminding people that the Spanish flu started in Kansas, right? And the head of Pfizer is a veterinarian who discovered a chemical castration vaccine for, overpopulated wild boars. So let's try to define our terms when we're talking to those that are emotionally attached to the television, and let's be the more calm, reasonable voice. I think that when we become reactionary, we become who they want us to be, and that's not good for us because we've got the truth. And so that becomes an indefatigable argument, irrefutable. And so it's only a matter of time in my eyes. It's an inevitability that we win this, because we are starting to really uncover the techniques and the procedures that they used. And so, I look forward to our next talk on Huxley, because it brings a whole other realm. And in the meantime, please, everybody, go to bulletproofpub.com and the history of propaganda.
Well, it looks like you're gonna maybe come here more often, because we got a request after that as well for you to talk about the organic farming and your industry on that. So we can do another show on that. So you may become a regular here with
Right on.
you and your information. And with what I just wanted to say with what you just said, and one of the reasons why I believe your work is so important is that it gives real names, addresses, and phone numbers to the problems that we have. When a lot of people want to believe it's aliens or it's reptiles or it's demons, it's like that makes people believe that we're fighting the supernatural, and if we're fighting the supernatural, what can we really do to win against it? But when you start looking at tangible roads to how these things took place, and real names and faces to, the whole network of what this matrix has become, then we can start to dismantle these parts of the indoctrination, start pulling out of it. And then your part that you're doing is growing, sustainability, growing real food is another big part of it. And that's what people need to be doing more, because the less you're dependent on them and their system, the less they can program you and mold you and tell you what to do. Because if you're not dependent, you can tell them to go pound salt, and what are they going to do, besides trying to come with physical armaments, which kind of goes against what their philosophy is. Because one of the things I believe that they still, as crazy and as psychopathic and as horrific as some of their actions are, one of the things that they live by is that they've got to tell people what they're going to do to them before they do it to them. And people have to willfully do it, because they also believe in karmic or universal liability. And they believe if people do it to themselves, then they're absolved from these horrific things, because they just open the door and people walk through it, opposed to them coming physical armaments, coming and pushing people through that door.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. It might be the best point of all of this talk, is that, when we're focused on aliens and saviors, it doesn't give us anything to fight. Now, when we have the truth and primary sources, that puts them on that side where they can't fight. And so let's be careful about, how we talk to people and what we entertain.
And they've been ruling under the guise of secrets. Nobody's known what they've been doing, how they've been doing it. And now we're in the age of information, where now we're actually uncovering, the people are being exposed, their methods are being exposed, and hence knowledge is power. The more knowledge we all collectively have, the less power they have over us.
Yep. It goes, in my mind, it goes understanding, knowledge, wisdom, power. So the more we understand, the more we gain knowledge, the more we become wise to their ways, and the more we take back that power.
Awesome, brother. Well, thanks again for your presentation. You did a wonderful job explaining this stuff.
Good.
And a lot of people stuck around for this
Right on.
information. So,
Cool.
Definitely you've done a great job. I'll look to booking you in our next slot. I
Sure.
believe it's in the second week of July. So
Okay.
we're fully booked for all of May, all of June, first
Wow.
week of
That's
July,
good, man.
five days a week, and fully booked. And
Yeah.
then we've got, I think, the second week of July, we can bring you in the next date or whatever. So I'll just send
Sure.
you the next date and see if that works.
Buddy, you do
together.
great work. I appreciate your host skills, and I've been comfortable here, and I'll do it again for sure.
Awesome. I appreciate that. This just fell into my lap, and we did the first truth telethon, and people said, Jesse, you found your calling. This is great. And
Nice.
I work really good under pressure. And the first telethon, we had 26 truthers back to back to back for 13 straight hours.
Wow.
And so I was the host and MC. And then also, if people didn't show up, I had to go trying to find people to fill in, that I knew to fill in the next slot, or I had to go and talk. And I didn't even know I had to actually talk, because sometimes people didn't show up. But I've been researching this stuff for 30 plus years. So I have a good knowledge, knowledge about a lot of different things. I'm not really too in depth in certain areas, like how you've shown in your presentation. I've known about some of these people and some of the names and some of the inner workings and things, but not in that depth. But I just have kind of an overall, kind of comprehension of the interworkings and how things, work into place. So I was able to talk for half an hour straight to fill in time slots. But they said, like, you found your calling, and then hence was born out of, later on, we became the missing link.
Right.
And
It's amazing,
dude. Seems like a great name. And
it is.
I think we're doing good work here. So a lot of
You
people
are.
appreciate this. So
I think that what I just provided was a missing link that's going to help expand that picture or bring it more into clarity. And so when you contacted me, I just thought, what a great name for a show, and what a great sort of paralleling of our work together, because this is really what we're trying to do, is fill in those missing links so people can start making the connections, connecting the dots. And 10 years ago when I started really getting into this research, there wasn't a lot of people out there like you. So what this has been able to do for us, it's been an advantage because it's pushed guys like you and me into entrepreneurial areas, which is really the best way to empower yourself against a totalitarian government or tyranny, is to be your own boss and to be self-sufficient. So, man, kudos to you. My hat goes off to you, brother, for all of your work, finding your calling, and not only finding your calling, but recognizing the opportunity and taking it where you've gone to today. It's impressive. I was super happy when you invited me on, so I'm looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. And it's a
Okay.
lot of hard work, but it's important work. And
Mhm.
it's not actually like work. Like, it's like, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy booking and making calls and finding people and setting up streams. And, there's a lot that goes into doing something like this 5 days
Sure,
a week, but
for sure.
I really enjoy this, so
Mhm.
hopefully it'll turn into a way that, we can sustain ourselves doing this, but we
Mhm.
haven't figured out that portion of it yet. But
Right.
we just know if we're doing the right work that things will be provided for, and so
Yeah.
far so good.
I would say to all your viewers and listeners, definitely support Jesse in their endeavors and inspire him to do greater and bigger things, because, we need to find more people like us that can't be coerced and that are brave enough to get out there and face our fears and get out into the public and spread this information. So thank you very much, Jesse, for all of that.
Awesome. You're very welcome. And again, thank you for all your hard work. This is amazing. I love this whole presentation.
Great. Cool.
We still got 2 more missing links this week. So we have one more tomorrow with Edward Morella. He's going to be talking about his near-death experience and, some of his knowledge. I've had a near-death experience when I fought a bunch of gangsters protecting a girl they were trying to pimp out, and I got stabbed 12
Wow.
times. So
Whoa.
one punctured my lung, and, I saw myself lifeless on the operating table in the room. So I had a crazy one myself. So we might get in a little bit about that tomorrow as well.
Cool. Okay,
But
I'll watch. I'll
and
throw you on while I work.
and then we have a group discussion again tomorrow. So that one is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. 10 is same time as today, 10 a.m.
Okay.
Pacific. Then at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, we're going to have another group panel where we're going to be discussing sovereignty and religious freedom. So
Cool.
we're kind of sovereignty based, but also religious freedom. Going to be asking all the panel members about, in the Bible, it says, give Caesar what is due, what is his. And it says in there, obey your government. Some of these things that kind of go counter to sovereignty. So
Sure.
I want to kind of got a whole knowledgeable panel that we're going to be discussing. This will be our 3rd panel that we did.
Cool.
The first 2 went great. It's fully booked. I think we got 9 or 10 piece speakers that are coming together to collaborate again tomorrow. So we do enjoy this panel. So I definitely going to look to having you on a future panel as well when we come to some of this knowledge and information. So love y'all. May the source be with you, Duane. Thanks everybody
You
for
too.
all your likes, comments, hearts, shares, and stars. We appreciate all
Thank
of
you.
your love and support. May the source be with y'all, and we'll see you back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, back on The Missing Link. The Missing Link is what it is because of all of you, and we're just going to keep doing this important work. Bye, everyone.